The text came in at 2:17. I was 6,000 miles from home, lying on a narrow cot in a dimly lit deployment barracks. The air smelled like detergent and metal. Most of the unit was asleep. My phone lit up the dark in a cold blue glow. Vivian. Thanks for your service. There was a photo attached. I opened it. A storefront sign. White lettering. Soft yellow lighting. Maggie May's table. My grandmother's name. Margaret Wolfe. But everyone called her Maggie May. The caption under the photo read, "Couldn't have done it without family support. Red Heart grand opening this Saturday." I stared at it for a long time. The Lakehouse had paid for that sign. The Lakehouse grandma left to me. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't have words, but because I understood instantly that silence would travel further than anger. And that was the moment the exile stopped being geographic. It became emotional. In my family, hierarchy wasn't subtle. My father, Richard Wolfe, ran our household like a spreadsheet. Every decision had columns. Every child had a projected return on investment. My mother, Diane, specialized in smoothing the edges. She called it keeping the peace. What it meant was never challenging him. Vivian was the golden child. Local. Charming. Photogenic. Safe. And me? I joined the army. Which, in my father's words, was a dramatic overcorrection. To him I wasn't brave. I was inconvenient. Grandma Maggie May was the only one who didn't measure me against a chart. She wrote letters. Real ones. With stamps. She told me I was steady. That steadiness outlives charm. When she got sick, I called every Sunday. Least I thought I did. The email about her death arrived while I was on base. Not a call. An email. Subject line. Grandma passed peacefully. There was a sentence buried near the bottom. We know it's complicated for you to travel. Don't disrupt your deployment. Discouraged from attending my own grandmother's funeral. The service was live-streamed at 3 a.m. my time. I watched it alone, volume low, while men around me snored behind thin curtains. Vivian gave a speech. Grandma loved all of us equally, she said, smiling through practiced tears. I remember thinking how carefully phrased that was. Equal is not the same as specific. And Grandma had been specific. 2 weeks later, I received an email from the estate attorney. The Lakehouse had been left solely to me. Not shared. Not divided. Mine. A handwritten note was scanned with the will. For Helena. She understands stillness. I read it 3 times. When I called my father, his voice was cool. We'll discuss it when you're home. Not congratulations. Not acknowledgement. Just postponement. That was the first sign something was wrong. I checked the county assessor's website the next day. The property had been sold 3 months earlier. Sale price, $450,000. My hands went cold. There was a power of attorney document attached to the transfer. My name. My signature. Except it wasn't mine. The loops were wrong. The pressure inconsistent. The H in Helena didn't lean the way mine does. I called him. He didn't deny it. I made a decision for this family, he said. Calm. Justified. You weren't here. The words rearranged something inside me. In that moment, I stopped being a daughter in a disagreement. I became something else. A plaintiff. Because this wasn't about grief anymore. It wasn't about hurt feelings or favoritism. It was forgery. Fraud. $450,000 routed through family. I stared at the restaurant photo again that night. At my grandmother's name glowing above a door I didn't authorize. And I realized something important. Silence isn't surrender. It's preparation. The next morning I scheduled a meeting with the JAG officer. And I began collecting everything. Major Crow didn't react the way civilians do. He didn't gasp. He didn't curse. He didn't lean back in shock. He just read. Slowly. Deliberately. The forged power of attorney. The county transfer record. The sale price. The date while I was deployed. When he finally looked up, his voice was steady. This isn't a family disagreement, he said. This is a crime. Something in my chest settled when he said that. Because for days I've been replaying my father's tone in my head. I made a decision for this family. As if that sentence erased fraud. As if authority could substitute for consent. Major Crow continued, calm and precise. You're protected under the Service Members Civil Relief Act. You were on active deployment. That alone complicates the legitimacy of any major financial authorization. Complicates. He meant destroys. Forgery. Fraud. Financial exploitation. And suddenly this wasn't emotional anymore. It was structural. He outlined the path forward carefully. Civil recovery first. Criminal referral possible. Evidence would matter more than outrage. Documentation wins, he said. So I built documentation. I created a folder on my laptop. I named it Meredith. Not for any legal reason. It was my grandmother's middle name. Inside that folder I started assembling a timeline. Screenshots of Vivian's Instagram posts. Grand opening countdowns. Behind-the-scenes renovations. Champagne glasses raised in front of construction equipment. All dated. All cross-referenced against my deployment orders. The Lakehouse closed in March. The restaurant lease signed in April. Renovation posts started in May. Every photo she posted celebrating family support aligned perfectly with the money from a house I never authorized to sell. The public narrative was glowing. Grateful. Blessed. Community-backed. The legal reality was cleaner. Transfer without consent. Forgery during active service. Proceeds redirected. I added voicemail recordings from my father. I handled it. You weren't available. Don't overreact. He sounded so certain. Confidence leaves fingerprints too. Major Crow referred me to a civilian attorney back home. Rebecca Holt. Her voice over the phone was direct, no nonsense. I need every version of your signature you've used in the last 5 years, she said. Driver's license renewals. Bank forms. Enlistment paperwork. Within a week, she had hired a forensic document examiner. The result came back clinical. 99.7% certainty the power of attorney signature was not mine. Pressure inconsistencies. Stroke sequencing errors. Natural hesitation marks that didn't match my baseline samples. It's a copycat attempt, Rebecca said. Confident but flawed. Then she uncovered something else. The notary listed on the document worked at the same regional bank branch my father used. They had served on a small-town business board together. That detail shifted the tone entirely. Improper notarization. Potential conspiracy. Felony implications. The word felony didn't scare me. Clarified things. But the evidence that changed everything didn't come from a document. It came from a neighbor. Maggie Calloway. She had lived 2 houses down from my grandmother for 30 years. Rebecca's investigator reached out to her quietly. Her statement was recorded. I told Margaret not to sign anything Richard brought over, Maggie said. She told me she wouldn't. She said Helena would handle it. My throat tightened when I heard that recording. She was sharp, Maggie continued. Sharp as ever. She told me, Richard will try to take it. There was a pause in the recording. Then Maggie said something that hollowed me out. He kept telling her you were too busy to call. That you hadn't reached out. For 2 years my calls had gone unanswered more often than not. Voicemails never returned. Birthday cards unacknowledged. I assumed she was tired. Confused. Fading. She died believing I stopped trying. That realization shifted this case from financial recovery to moral exposure. He didn't just steal property. He isolated her. Intercepted calls. Controlled access. That's not estate mismanagement. That's manipulation. And it explains something I'd never understood. Why her letters stopped so suddenly. When my deployment ended, my family planned an airport ambush. I found out through a cousin. They wanted a sentimental reunion. Cameras. Tears. Let's talk this out. I declined. Politely. They insisted. I didn't engage. Instead I came home quietly. Took a cab from the airport. When I unlocked my apartment door I found them inside. My father. My mother. Vivian. They had used the emergency contact key on file. As if access were still theirs. We just want to fix this, my mother said immediately. My father stepped forward. You're overcomplicating things. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I walked back outside. Called the building manager. Reported unauthorized entry. Changed the locks that afternoon. Filed a formal complaint documenting the incident. Boundaries are louder than shouting. My father called that night. I let it ring, because by then, everything I needed to say was already in motion. The civil complaint was filed 2 weeks later. Forgery, fraud, financial exploitation, restitution demanded. $450,000. Plus damages. When the summons was served, my cousin texted me. Dad is freaking out. I imagined him holding the paperwork, reading his name listed formally. Defendant. Authority dissolves differently when it's printed in black ink. Vivian posted nothing that week. The restaurant's social media went quiet. And for the first time since that 2:17 a.m. text, I felt something other than shock. Not revenge. Not satisfaction. Control. Silence wasn't surrender. It had been preparation. And now, the case would move forward in a place my father couldn't dominate. A courtroom. I wore my Class A uniform to court. Not as a performance. Not as intimidation. But as context. Service ribbons aligned. Jacket pressed. Hair secured tight at the nape of my neck. When I walked into that small-town courtroom, the contrast was unavoidable. Service versus exploitation. The gallery was fuller than I expected. Small towns don't ignore fraud cases involving familiar names. Word travels faster than facts. Maggie Calloway sat in the second row, hands folded over her purse. Major Crow wasn't representing me directly, but he sat quietly in the back observing. My father stood at the defense table in a navy suit he wore to church and Rotary dinners. Calm, composed, controlled. Vivian sat behind him. No Instagram filters. No captions. Just silence. When the judge entered, the room rose. The sound of chairs moving in unison felt heavier than usual. And just like that, it wasn't family anymore. It was record. Rebecca Holt began methodically. No dramatics. No raised voice. She laid out the timeline first. Grandmother's will. Active deployment dates. Power of attorney execution. Property sale. Funds transferred. Then she introduced the forensic document examiner. Charts appeared on the monitor. Enlarged signatures side by side. Mine consistent pressure fluid stroke. The forged one hesitation marks. Unnatural pen lifts. A tremor that wasn't mine. Within reasonable professional certainty, the examiner stated clearly, the question signature was not written by Helena Wolfe. Not emotional. Scientific. Then came the bank records. The $450,000 sale proceeds. Deposited into an account temporarily held under estate management. Transferred within 72 hours. Destination. A business startup account in Vivian Wolfe's name. The courtroom shifted. It's one thing to suspect favoritism. It's another to see wire confirmations on a screen. Rebecca didn't stop there. She displayed Vivian's public Instagram posts. Grand opening countdowns. Renovation photos. Captions thanking family generosity. Dates highlighted. Aligned perfectly with the transfer timeline. Public narrative versus legal reality. Side by side. Clean. Undeniable. The phrase family support felt different in a courtroom. My father took the stand. He swore confidently. When asked why he executed the power of attorney, he leaned into familiarity. My daughter was overseas, he said. Communication was limited. My mother's intentions weren't entirely clear in her final months. He spoke as though he were explaining a budgeting decision. As though this were logistics. Rebecca didn't interrupt. She waited. Was there any medical documentation declaring Margaret Wolfe incompetent? She asked. No, he admitted. Did the will name Helena Wolfe as sole beneficiary of the Lakehouse? Yes. And did Helena Wolfe ever sign a power of attorney granting you authority to sell the property? Silence. His attorney objected briefly. Overruled. No, my father said. The judge leaned forward slightly. Intent ambiguity does not nullify a valid will, she stated firmly. Nor does physical distance erase ownership. The air shifted. Authority was no longer his. Then Maggie Calloway testified. Her voice trembled at first but steadied quickly. Margaret told me she was worried, she said. She said Richard would try to take the Lakehouse. A murmur rippled through the gallery. She was sharp, Maggie continued. We did crossword puzzles together 2 weeks before she passed. She knew exactly what she was doing. Rebecca asked the question carefully. Did Margaret ever express doubt about leaving the property to Helena? No, Maggie said firmly. She said Helena understood stillness. I felt that line land in the room again. Then came the part that changed everything. Did you ever witness interference with Helena's communication? Maggie hesitated. Yes, she said. Richard told Margaret that Helena was too busy to call, that she hadn't reached out. My chest tightened, but I didn't move, because now it wasn't just about a property. It was about isolation, control, rewriting reality. The gallery was no longer neutral. Perception was shifting in real time. The judge reviewed the documents quietly for several minutes. When she finally spoke, her tone was measured. The sale to third-party buyers will not be reversed, she said. They are protected as innocent purchasers. My stomach dipped briefly. Then she continued. However, the proceeds of that sale were obtained through fraudulent misrepresentation and forged documentation. She looked directly at my father. Full restitution of $450,000 is ordered. A pause. Additionally, this court awards $85,000 in compensatory damages. Total liability, $535,000. The number settled over the courtroom like weather. And, she added, this matter will be referred to the district attorney for review of potential criminal charges, including forgery and financial exploitation. Class H felony. In our state, that carried weight. Real weight. My father didn't collapse physically. He didn't faint or shout. But something in him folded inward. His shoulders lowered. His jaw unclenched. The certainty that used to radiate from him dimmed. For decades he controlled rooms. He controlled narratives. He controlled perception. In that courtroom he controlled nothing. Vivian stared straight ahead, face drained of color. The restaurant sign with Grandma's name on it suddenly looked less like tribute and more like evidence. When the judge adjourned, the sound of chairs rising again felt different. Not tense. Resolved. As people filed out, I caught fragments of whispers. Forgery. Unbelievable. I had no idea. Small towns remember. And they recalibrate. Outside the courthouse, cameras weren't waiting. No headlines blared. But reputation had shifted publicly. And in small communities that can echo louder than media. As I walked down the courthouse steps in uniform, I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady. Because truth hadn't shouted. It had simply been documented. Behind me, my father remained on the steps a moment longer than everyone else. Not a patriarch. Not a decision maker. Just a defendant facing something he couldn't spreadsheet away. And this time, distance hadn't protected him. It had protected me. The courtroom ruling was only the beginning. What followed wasn't loud. It was administrative. And administrative consequences can be relentless. The first crack came from the notary. Under pressure from the civil findings, she cooperated. Her license was suspended pending investigation. In her formal statement, she admitted the power of attorney had not been properly executed in her presence. I relied on familiarity, she said. Familiarity. That small-town word that so often replaces procedure. She confirmed my father had brought the document in already signed. She confirmed she did not witness the signature. She confirmed she notarized it anyway. That statement alone transformed suspicion into confirmed fraud. Because now it wasn't just my word against his. It was a licensed professional admitting misconduct. And once that domino fell, others began to shift. The district attorney's office opened a formal review. No immediate arrest. No flashing lights. Just paperwork. Requests for bank records. Interviews scheduled. Forensic timelines extended. My father hired a defense attorney within a week. Expensive. Reputable. The kind who charges by the hour whether he's speaking or breathing. Retainers were paid from retirement accounts. Funds that were supposed to carry him through the next 20 years. Withdrawn early. Penalized. Taxed. You could almost chart the erosion in real time. Control is expensive when you're trying to maintain it. And criminal defense is more expensive than pride ever anticipates. The restaurant didn't collapse overnight. It faded. First business slowed quietly. A few canceled reservations. Then more. Small towns don't need official statements. They just need court dates. The newspaper published a short legal notice summarizing the judgment. No drama. Just facts. Fraudulent transfer. Restitution ordered. Criminal referral pending. Those phrases don't pair well with family dining. Suppliers shortened payment terms. Staff began asking cautious questions. Vivian tried to project normalcy online, but the tone had shifted. Comments were disabled. Then posts stopped altogether. Within months, the numbers didn't add up. Equipment was liquidated. The lease was terminated early. The sign Maggie May's table was removed on a gray Tuesday morning. No ceremony. No apology. Just two workers unscrewing letters that never should have been there. When I heard it was gone, I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt stillness. Grandma's name wasn't meant to hang above fraud. It was meant to rest. Social fallout moved more subtly. My father's golf invitations slowed. Church conversations shortened. People who once deferred to him now maintained polite distance. Thanksgiving became complicated. Questions resurfaced in quiet corners. Did you know? How long was this going on? Was Helena really unaware? The narrative shifted from ungrateful daughter to fraud case. That shift matters in a small town, because reputation is currency, and once devalued, it rarely recovers to its original rate. The restitution order carried a 90-day deadline. $535,000. Principal plus damages. It wasn't symbolic. It was mathematical. Assets were evaluated. Accounts consolidated. Retirement portfolios partially liquidated. Vivian's personal savings, modest compared to the total, were swept into the repayment plan. She hadn't forged the document, but the funds had landed in her account. Financial benefit carries legal weight. I was told through attorneys that she cried during one meeting. Not dramatically, just quietly. The realization settling in that the dream she thought she was building had been financed with theft. That she wasn't a visionary entrepreneur. She was the beneficiary of fraud. That kind of awareness doesn't explode. Sinks. The repayment arrived in structured transfers. Large sterile wire confirmations. Each one documented. Each one recorded. There was no dramatic handoff. No check slid across a table. Just electronic numbers returning to where they should have been. My grandmother's Lakehouse was gone. That couldn't be reversed. But the value extracted from it was restored. As the 90-day mark approached, criminal charges were still pending. Forgery, financial exploitation, improper notarization conspiracy, Class H felony exposure. My father began reading criminal statutes at night. I know because my mother told me. He's trying to understand sentencing ranges, she said softly. For a man who once measured control in spreadsheets, now measuring time in potential years was sobering. Authority had shifted permanently. He wasn't navigating investments anymore. He was navigating defense strategy. Not patriarch. Defendant. What struck me most wasn't the financial loss. It was the isolation. The same isolation he engineered for my grandmother in her final years. Phone calls that didn't come. Invitations that didn't extend. The social silence that follows exposed wrongdoing. There is a particular loneliness that comes from public accountability. It doesn't roar. It echoes. And in that echo, control dissolves. By the end of it, the restaurant was gone. The retirement cushion was thinner. The social circle smaller. The pending criminal review unresolved but looming. And the myth, the carefully curated image of decisive patriarch managing family assets, had fractured beyond repair. No shouting had been required. No dramatic revenge speech delivered. Just documentation, procedure, evidence, reality closing in from all sides. When distance no longer protected him, structure replaced it. And structure doesn't negotiate. It simply proceeds. People assume that when you win a case like that, you feel victorious. You don't. You feel quiet. Not relieved. Not triumphant. Just still. For months, my life had been built around documents, deadlines, legal calls, and strategy. Every decision had purpose. Every conversation had weight. I was moving forward with intention, even when I was exhausted. And then one day the wires stopped. The court filings slowed. The phone stopped ringing. There was no next hearing circled on the calendar. There was just space. And space is louder than conflict. The money had been restored. The legal findings were final. The restaurant was gone. Criminal review was still pending, but my role in it was mostly procedural now. On paper, everything had aligned. But paper doesn't process grief. Because underneath the fraud, underneath the courtroom language, there was still something harder to name. It was my father. Not just the defendant. Not just the man who forged a document. My father. I kept replaying small memories that had nothing to do with money. Him teaching me how to ride a bike. The way he used to tap the steering wheel when he was thinking. The sound of his laugh before everything became about control. It would have been easier if he had always been cruel. But he wasn't. That's what makes betrayal complicated. It doesn't erase the good memories. It distorts them. The first time I saw him after the judgment was at a distance. Grocery store. Early evening. He was at the end of an aisle, holding a box of cereal, staring at it like it required negotiation. He looked smaller. Not physically. Just diminished. He saw me. For a moment neither of us moved. There was no anger on his face. No defiance. Just calculation. Then something else. Something close to uncertainty. He didn't approach. Neither did I. We existed in the same space for maybe 20 seconds. Then he turned the cart and walked the other direction. No words were exchanged. And somehow that silence said everything. My mother called me 2 weeks later. She didn't defend him. She didn't accuse me. She just sounded tired. He's different, she said quietly. I didn't ask how. I didn't need to. Control had always been his armor. Now it had been stripped away publicly. That kind of exposure changes a person. Or it reveals them. Maybe both. She told me he had stopped going to certain gatherings. That he avoided eye contact more than he used to. That he read late into the night. He says he's preparing, she said. Preparing. For what neither of us clarified. People also assume revenge feels satisfying. But this wasn't revenge. Revenge is loud. It's emotional. It's reactive. This was structural. I didn't ruin him. The documentation did. The notarized admission did. The bank transfers did. The legal process did exactly what it was designed to do when someone manipulates power. It corrected the imbalance. And correction doesn't feel like celebration. It feels like gravity returning. The hardest part wasn't the courtroom. It was the recalibration. For most of my life, I had measured myself against his approval. His standards. His version of strength. Winning the case didn't magically erase that conditioning. There were nights I wondered if I had gone too far. If I could have handled it privately. If exposing him had fractured something beyond repair. But then I would remember the forged signature. My grandmother's name signed without her consent. The calculated transfer. The restaurant sign hanging where it never belonged. And I would remind myself, accountability is not cruelty. Silence would have been cruelty. I visited the lake the house once overlooked. Not the property itself. That was gone. Just the water. It was early morning. Quiet. The kind of quiet that feels sacred instead of heavy. I brought coffee and sat on a wooden bench facing the shoreline. Grandma used to say the lake held memory. That it remembered who treated it gently. I thought about her final years. About isolation. About trust misplaced. And I felt something settle inside me. Not anger. Not even sadness. Clarity. I hadn't fought for money. I had fought for record. For truth. For the simple acknowledgement that what happened was wrong. And now that acknowledgement existed in writing, in court transcripts, in official findings. History wouldn't rewrite itself in his favor. That mattered. The criminal review eventually moved forward. Formal charges were filed. There was no dramatic arrest scene. He surrendered through counsel. Processing was procedural. Fingerprints. Booking. Release pending further hearings. Another quiet shift in status. Another title adjusted. From father to defendant. Again. When I received notice of the filing, I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I closed the email. I set my phone down. And I went for a walk. Because justice, when it's real, doesn't create fireworks. It creates equilibrium. We haven't spoken. Not truly. There have been logistical exchanges through attorneys, occasional forwarded communications when legally necessary, but no apology, no confrontation, no emotional reckoning. Maybe that will come. Maybe it won't. Some fractures don't seal. They stabilize. And sometimes stability is enough. If you had asked me a year ago what strength looked like, I would have described resilience, endurance, survival. Now I would describe documentation, patience, letting systems work, refusing to be gaslit by authority. Strength isn't shouting the loudest. It's standing still when the narrative shifts and letting facts speak. And when the noise finally fades, when the courtroom empties and the headlines disappear, what remains isn't triumph. It's alignment. The truth recorded. The imbalance corrected. The silence no longer weaponized. And in that stillness I found something I hadn't expected. Peace. Not because he lost, but because the truth didn't.